Before Vegeta ever stepped foot on Earth, before the scouter readings became a thing, before Nappa wiped out cities because he was bored and he just needed to kill time, Dragon Ball Z had already told you something important. You were supposed to be afraid of Vegeta before you even knew his face. And I think the show does this quietly, right? There are no speeches, no grand villain monologue in the traditional sense. I just think we get introduced to two sane warriors standing on a planet that doesn't appear to matter to them at all. And in my opinion, the Bugs planet is not really about the bugs. I've seen people make those arguments in cases for years about that scene. I guess depending on who you ask, I'm not taking anything away from you. I just didn't gather that that was the message they were trying to sell in that scene. I thought the Bug Planet was treated like filler, something you glanced over on a rewatch, not something you went back because it was the worst thing that you had ever seen happen. I mean, I'm not gonna lie to you guys. I think we've all probably mistakenly stepped on a couple of bugs, not knowingly in our lifetime. So I don't think those creatures were ever really a threat. I don't think they were ever meant to be remembered. I think they existed for one reason, and that was just to show you what casual destruction actually looks like in real form. And Vegeta and Nappa don't have the traditional rage that you would expect from villains. They don't celebrate. They barely react. It just happens, and then it's like, well, I guess that was fun. On to the next thing, right? They land, they assess, they erase a civilization, and they move on. And I think that's ultimately what gives them the appearance of being more cold, more efficient, and potentially even more godlike for the beginning of the series. Because the scene, in my opinion, and anybody else can disagree, and that's fine. The scene for me wasn't disturbing in a horror sense. I would say it's colder than that. It's more efficient because there's no emotional weight really put on the bugs dying outside of, oh, my love, oh, like that little romantic 3 5 second thing at the end. It's like, yeah, I couldn't, like, we all saw that coming. So I think the Saiyans at that stage didn't have to show any emotion in order for their survival to be necessary, right? So I look at that as that's how gods would destroy ants, more or less. Not because they're angry, not because they're cruel. It just costs them nothing. I think that's the tone shift that Dragon Ball Z introduced there with this episode more so. And it's important to remember, I think it was about sending a message, not actually, if empathy worked for you, then that's great. Like, right, there's all sorts of fans and angles. You want fans like me to feel something or nothing. You want fans maybe in another category to feel something. And I think Toriyama was able to do that and still communicate the message that this is not the big deal. Like, the biggest thing is yet to come. So you have this power scaling without numbers thing. And I think that's what's brilliant about this episode and the moment of them on that planet, because you don't have to rely on scouter numbers yet, right? You already know that Raditz essentially embarrassed Goku and Piccolo by himself, and if it wasn't for Gohan breaking out of that Saiyan pod, Goku and Piccolo were probably going to die. So, and unfortunately, Goku still had to sacrifice himself in order to stop his evil brother. So, when Vegeta and Nappa show up and they effortlessly wipe out an entire planet, your brain does the math on its own. And if Raditz was considered this dangerous, and if these two are above him, as in Vegeta and Nappa, when it comes to their power, it starts to make you think that Earth doesn't really stand a chance, and that ants, more or less, not because they're angry, not because they're cruel. It just costs them nothing. I think that's the tone shift that Dragon Ball Z introduced there with this episode more so. And it's important to remember, I think it was about sending a message, not actually, if empathy worked for you, then that's great. Like, right, there's all sorts of fans and angles. You want fans like me to feel something or nothing. You want fans maybe in another category to feel something. And I think Toriyama was able to do that and still communicate the message that this is not the big deal. Like, the biggest thing is yet to come. So you have this power scaling without numbers thing. And I think that's what's brilliant about this episode and the moment of them on that planet, because you don't have to rely on scouter numbers yet, right? You already know that Raditz essentially embarrassed Goku and Piccolo by himself, and if it wasn't for Gohan breaking out of that Saiyan pod, Goku and Piccolo were probably going to die. So, and unfortunately, Goku still had to sacrifice himself in order to stop his evil brother. So, when Vegeta and Nappa show up and they effortlessly wipe out an entire planet, your brain does the math on its own. And if Raditz was considered this dangerous, and if these two are above him, as in Vegeta and Nappa, when it comes to their power, it starts to make you think that Earth doesn't really stand a chance, and that, oh, wait, they're not really saying all that much prior to entering Earth because they don't really have to, right? No dialogue is required. So with Vegeta and Nappa, essentially seen, in my opinion, I would say in the very beginning as equals, but not the same, and that may sound confusing. Excuse me, a little bit confusing. Let me explain. Early on, Vegeta, in my opinion, doesn't really dominate Nappa in a traditional hierarchy sense, and I think that's important to pay attention to because they're framed as equals in status, but not necessarily in nature. You see, Nappa is expressive, he's loud, he's physically overwhelming, which gives you that appearance that Nappa's obviously, the grunt of the group, right? But Vegeta is still, he's observant, he's contained, he allows Nappa to have his fun, he doesn't bark orders yet because he feels like he doesn't need to. In fact, he knows he doesn't need to. And I think it's that restraint that we see from Vegeta that actually makes him more dangerous, and that's something that I personally noticed and I was paying attention to as I was rewatching that for the first times, and even still on my rewatches now as an adult. Like, I'm like, man, Vegeta's entrance was really solid. I would have hated if Toriyama did something different because I think that set the stage for where the character is today. Because leadership isn't always about volume, it's about certainty and decisiveness, and that's something I've always believed since, man, as long as I can tell you. So when we talk about that, we have to talk about the authority and the brutality that we see from Vegeta and Nappa as they finally get to Earth. And I would say, even if depending on how you look at it, that first initial explosion of the bug planet could have been the start of that. Nappa obviously represents the raw force side of their dynamic. Vegeta represents that authority. And then Dragon Ball Z subtly teaches you something here, that strength can be and is scary, but when it's controlled, it's terrifying. And we've seen that among many villains, not just in Dragon Ball, but in related Dragon Ball anime and other shonen anime through our lives as well. And Vegeta doesn't really have to prove himself. There's nothing for him to do early on until he has to actually fight Goku, and he basically escapes within an inch of his life, and he's spared. And I think it's more importantly that Vegeta knows where he stands prior to meeting Goku. He doesn't know about Kakarot's strength. But when he's on his missions with Nappa, when he was with the Frieza Force, his strength was what he knew. It was controlled, and he never really faced any opposition. And I think that matters. So the Saiyan identity for Vegeta and Nappa, I think, becomes revealed towards the end of this particular time right before they get to Earth, because it's not just about Vegeta, it's about the Saiyans being true warriors, like the show has tried to explain to us with Raditz's arrival. And Raditz wasn't a fluke, he wasn't an outlier. I think he was the baseline that had to set up the next stage, because the Bug Planet confirms that Saiyans aren't just warriors, they are literally conquerors by design. There's no attachment, there's no hesitation, there's no remorse for their mission. And it's a species that's obviously built for domination. And that's obviously where our main protagonist, Son Goku, comes from. And that's why I think it matters that Goku was a Saiyan and not some other character, species in the show, and we all have our favorites and our types. I think that's the quiet gut punch of the scene for us watching, when Vegeta and Nappa are showing you that there are Saiyans that don't play by the same rules, right? Because Goku isn't just a hero now, he has to fight stronger enemies that he has clearly looked weak to with Raditz, and then these other two Saiyans that are stronger are coming to Earth as well. It's a deviation from his own race. Vegeta represents what Goku could have been. It's kindness that intervened on behalf of Goku. If you take out the kindness that we know from our hero, then you have Goku probably alongside Vegeta and Nappa doing the same exact stuff for those missions. Had Bardock from our hero, then you have Goku probably alongside Vegeta and Nappa doing the same exact stuff for those missions. Had Bardock maybe not thought to send his son away prior to Planet Vegeta's destruction. There's always a timeline where maybe Bardock decides to send Goku somewhere else, or maybe says, hey, Dragon Ball has done such weird stuff, and it's like he was too young to fight or to do anything, but he was still conscious enough, at least with the Toriyama rework. And I think based off of that knowledge is where they would have probably twisted the story a little bit. But the contrast is still there, and it's the fact that these guys haven't even got to Earth yet, but you know how much of a problem they're going to be based off of what you saw from two Saiyans of Raditz and Goku going at it prior. So I thought the silence did its job. We didn't really need a lot of dialogue with Vegeta and Nappa. It's intentional. It lets us project what fears we may or may not have. We can sit with that realization. And then if Earth looks anything like that bug planet, you're like, how are they going to survive? Because that was nothing. Vegeta, a finger, you know what I mean? More or less what Vegeta did to, or excuse me, Frieza did to Vegeta's homeworld. You know, it's like the Saiyans aren't just coming to Earth to fight. They're literally coming to conquer and collect the planet. And obviously the plans changed once they got there. So I think in closing, why Vegeta felt inevitable as a character among his introduction into the series is because by the time he finally lands on Earth with Nappa, the show doesn't really need to sell him to you anymore that this is the guy you need to pay attention to. It was very clear that, okay, Vegeta and Nappa are seen as equals in different contexts, but Vegeta is still the one that you're going to be watching and paying attention to long term, right? So you already had to accept him as a legitimate threat, and everything else wasn't really foreshadowing. It was just a confirmation prior that, yeah, Vegeta's coming and it's real. And quite frankly, his popularity is what kept him in the series. We still know Toriyama didn't have intentions to keep him after, the the Planet Namek saga, which is still crazy to me. But yeah, he wasn't going to surprise you. He was just going to arrive and do his thing, and you had to like him or not like him. So I think that's what makes early Dragon Ball Z special, because it didn't rush fear like traditional shows do. It earned it. And for me, when I try to tell my friends why I won't watch certain shows, I'm like, bro, the stakes just don't feel real enough. It just feels fabricated. It feels elongated. It feels like they just made this thing up out of nowhere and they're telling you to believe it. And I'm always going to critically ask, why should I believe this thing when you don't have an answer or context to give me a reason to believe it? And I think that's a difference between a show that can really get you to feel like there's emotional stakes that are worth watching, and a show where you're like, okay, this is good background, whatever, but like I'm not really invested. You know what I mean? And that's way before we got to serious power-ups and transformations and all the stuff that we loved about Dragon Ball Z. Toriyama really mastered that in Dragon Ball, and I think the show taught you how to feel. We all, more or less, that have watched Dragon Ball in our lives have been able to, I think, adapt in ways that most people can't, because the show taught you real messages and real things that there are still some people that you would have these conversations with in your day to day, and you know what I'm talking about. They would look at you like you were crazy, and you're like, nah, man, I learned from Akira Toriyama sensei. You know what I mean? And I think that's what makes the show so special for us, because it wasn't just the show. We were learning about life, and we were learning about the hardships of life. We were learning about threats. We were learning about composure. We were learning about restraint in situations. And I think all of that goes so unnoticed, and it goes so under the radar when it comes to why you can enjoy something so much like Dragon Ball, or why it can affect your life in such a positive way. I think it's the quiet understanding that Earth was never ready, but you had to find a way to get it ready with the Z Fighters. And gosh, I think we all can relate to that in our personal lives in one way or another. So, well, if you guys have enjoyed this topic, I've been doing a lot of these lately. It takes forever because you're rewatching, you're writing your script, you're kind of going through if things make sense. I'm looking things up and researching things and rereading things in order to make sure I have relative accurate information, and then I can use as much of that to my best knowledge to give you guys analytical perspective, philosophical perspective as well, which I think is still it's just I still feel like it's such an overlooked aspect of Dragon Ball, and it's what I love about it so much. I'm like, y'all are missing like the free knowledge this thing is giving you for life that you can't really find in the same context anywhere else, because it's telling you so many things at once, whereas other shows, anime or non-related, will do that only in a couple of lanes, and they keep you very restricted. Dragon Ball has forced you to have to accept every anomaly, every possibility, every emotion, for better or for worse, and I think that's what makes it what it is for us today. So feel free to let me know if you guys have anything else related to this first part of the Saiyan saga. We'll continue moving on as we go through chronologically through the entire series. It's probably going to take the end of this year to do so. Always feel free to hit that like button, guys. It does help out a lot. Lets me know you like these topics, this type of content going forward, and I'll continue to do this and make sure I keep it up to the best of my ability. So always stay tough, stay strong, stay in the fight, and there with you all the way, brother. Have a good one. We'll talk later.